Attention on deck, the crystalline voice of Instructor First Class Nixavac echoed through the polished corridors of Station Delta 9's Advanced Theoretical Physics Wing. Their translucent appendages rippled with barely contained disdain as Cadet Zhang Wei strolled into the classroom, a full 3 minutes early, which by Quilxian standards was practically late. The massive observation windows of the station provided a spectacular view of the nearby nebula, its purples and blues casting an otherworldly glow across the assembled students. Most of them possessed either tentacles, crystalline structures, or some form of evolved appendage, perfect for complex mathematical calculations. And then there was Zhang Wei, with his comparatively primitive bipedal form and simple fingers. "Cadet Wei," Nixavac's voice crackled with artificial translation, "I trust you've prepared adequately for today's quantum mechanics examination." The instructor's bioluminescent spots pulsed with what passed for amusement among their species. Zhang grinned, pulling out his ancient tablet computer, a device that made several of his crystalline classmates vibrate with what could only be described as suppressed laughter. "Yes, instructor. Though I have to admit I spent most of last night playing this fascinating Earth game called poker with some of the maintenance crew." A ripple of multi-species chuckling spread through the classroom. The Quilxian instructor's spots flashed rapid-fire patterns of disbelief and resignation. It wasn't the first time the human had demonstrated what they considered to be a shocking lack of academic dedication. "I see," Nixavac responded, their translator struggling to convey the appropriate level of disapproval. "Perhaps you'd care to explain why you believe recreational activities take precedence over preparing for the most challenging theoretical physics examination in the United Species Academy." Zhang settled into his reinforced seat, specially designed to accommodate his unusual Deathworlder mass. "Well, instructor, I've always found that understanding probability and chaos theory comes more naturally over a good game of cards." The Voltaran cadet to his left twisted their sensory stalks in confusion. "But human, your species barely achieved FTL travel a century ago. How could you possibly grasp the fundamental principles of quantum probability through primitive card games?" "That's exactly the kind of thinking that makes this all so interesting," Zhang replied, powering up his tablet. The device's holographic display flickered to life, its outdated projection making the Marixian cadets' advanced neural interfaces look like supercomputers in comparison. Instructor Nixavac's appendages stiffened, their species equivalent of an eye roll. "Very well, cadet. Since you're so confident, perhaps you'd like to begin today's examination by explaining the Heisenberg-Quilxian uncertainty principle and its applications in faster-than-light travel?" Zhang's smile never wavered. If anything, it grew wider, displaying what several species in the room instinctively recognized as a predator's teeth. "Actually, instructor, I have some thoughts about that principle that you might find interesting." The human's tone made several of his classmates nervously adjust their gravitational stabilizers. They'd learned over the past few months that when Zhang Wei used that particular tone of voice, reality itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see what this Deathworlder would do next. "Today's examination," Nixavac announced, their bioluminescent spots pulsing in sync with the holographic display materializing in the center of the classroom, "concerns the theoretical limits of quantum tunneling in relation to dark matter manipulation." The projection showed a complex mathematical equation that seemed to twist in on itself, defying the conventional laws of geometry. Several crystalline students began humming in harmony their species' method of advanced calculation. "As you can see," the instructor continued, "we have a standard quantum tunneling scenario, but with an impossible variable." Their appendages gestured at a symbol that appeared to flicker between 3 different states simultaneously. "The Quilxian Science Academy has declared this problem unsolvable within our current understanding of physics. It serves as a reminder of the humbling limitations of our knowledge." Zhang raised his hand, which itself was apparently an antiquated gesture that made Nixavac's translator crackle with static. "Question, instructor, why exactly is it considered impossible?" "Because, cadet," the Voltaran student next to him interrupted, their sensory stalks vibrating with condescension, "the quantum state cannot exist in 3 phases simultaneously while maintaining coherence within a dark matter field. Every advanced species knows this. Every advanced species, huh? Zhang muttered, scribbling something on his tablet that made absolutely no sense to his peering classmates. His calculations appeared to be interspersed with crude drawings of playing cards and what looked like a game of tic-tac-toe. The Marixian cadets had already linked their neural interfaces, forming a collective computation network that hummed with processing power. The crystalline students vibrated at frequencies designed to enhance their natural computational abilities. Even the gaseous Heloxy student had condensed into their most efficient problem-solving state. Meanwhile, Zhang was whistling. The sound made several of his classmates' universal translators malfunction. Cadet Wei, Nexavac's spots pulsed with increasing irritation. Perhaps you'd care to approach this problem with the seriousness it deserves. This is not one of your Earth card games. Oh, but that's where you're wrong, instructor, Zhang replied, his fingers dancing across his tablet's surface. This is exactly like a card game. Specifically, it's like calculating the odds of drawing a royal flush while playing in zero gravity with cards that might or might not exist. The classroom fell silent, even the crystalline students' harmonious humming cutting off abruptly. The Volteran students' sensory stalks went completely rigid, a sign of either deep offense or total bewilderment. Explain, Nixavac demanded, their spots now pulsing in a pattern that indicated genuine curiosity beneath the professional disapproval. Zhang stood up, his Deathworlder mass making his reinforced chair creak. Well, look at this supposedly impossible variable. Everyone's assuming it has to maintain coherence in all three states within the dark matter field, right? But what if... He paused, grinning that unsettling predator's grin again. What if we're not playing with a full deck? He began drawing something on the classroom's main holographic display. His crude human fingers shouldn't have been able to manipulate the advanced alien technology with such precision, but somehow they did. The impossible variable began to shift and transform under his modifications. See, on Earth we have this thing called quantum poker. It's not really poker, but it helps us visualize quantum states. And in quantum poker, sometimes the best hand is the one that both exists and doesn't exist until you look at it. The Marixian neural network began generating error messages. Two of the crystalline students started vibrating at frequencies that threatened to shatter their outer matrices. The Heloxy student had expanded to twice their normal size in apparent distress. Cadet Wei, Nixavac's translator, struggled to maintain coherence. Are you suggesting we treat the quantum tunneling equation as a game of probability? Zhang's grin widened even further. Not exactly, instructor. I'm suggesting we treat it like a game of probability, where the cards can decide to be in multiple places at once, and the dealer might be a cat in a box that's both dead and alive. That's when the impossible variable in his equation began to solve itself. The holographic display at the front of the classroom now showed what the United Species Academy considered the most elegant form of mathematical beauty, and simultaneously their greatest failure. The quantum tunneling equation stretched across 3 dimensions, its variables dancing in and out of existence like subatomic particles, playing hide-and-seek with reality. For the benefit of our less advanced students, Sergeant Instructor Kletex said, as they materialized in the classroom doorway, their photonic form barely containing their smugness, let me break down why this problem has stumped the greatest minds in the galaxy. Zhang noticed how the sergeant's arrival made Nixavac's appendages stiffen even further. Great, he thought, another superior being coming to witness the Deathworlder's inevitable failure. The quantum tunneling problem before you, Kletex continued, their photonic form casting prismatic patterns across the walls, requires reconciling 3 quantum states that our current models say cannot coexist. Observe. The sergeant manipulated the display, highlighting 3 distinct mathematical constructs that seem to orbit each other like binary stars around a black hole. The first state requires a positive quantum spin in a dark matter field. The second requires a negative spin in the same field. The third, they paused for dramatic effect, requires 0 spin while simultaneously maintaining both previous states. A Marixian cadet's neural interface sparked visibly as they attempted to process this information. But, Sergeant, their synthesized voice wavered, that violates the fundamental laws of quantum coherence. Precisely, Cadet, Kletex's photonic form brightened with approval. which is why this problem serves as a reminder of our limitations. Now let's observe how each of you approaches this impossibility. The next 30 minutes were a symphony of increasingly desperate attempts at solving the unsolvable. The crystalline students formed complex geometric patterns with their bodies, trying to physically model the quantum states. Their harmonious humming reached frequencies that made Zhang's fillings vibrate. The Voltaran contingent extended their sensory stalks to their full length, forming living antenna arrays that they claimed could feel the quantum fluctuations. All they managed to do was accidentally tune into what sounded like an alien shopping network. The Hiloxi students' gaseous form tied itself into literal knots, trying to demonstrate some advanced theoretical concept that just resulted in them having to be untangled by the classroom's artificial gravity systems. Through it all, Zhang sat quietly, occasionally glancing between his tablet, the main equation, and the pack of playing cards he'd somehow produced from his uniform pocket. This did not go unnoticed. Cadet Wei, Sergeant Keltex floated over to his desk, their photonic form dimming condescendingly. Perhaps you'd care to explain why you're engaging in primitive entertainment rather than attempting to solve the problem. Zhang held up a playing card, the ace of spades. Tell me, Sergeant, in your quantum mechanics, do you have anything similar to Schrödinger's cat? The primitive Earth thought experiment? Keltex's form flickered with what might have been laughter. A charming but drastically oversimplified way of understanding quantum superposition. What could it possibly have to do with this advanced problem? Well, Zhang said, flipping the card between his fingers with practiced ease, in poker, this ace can have multiple values, depending on the hand you're trying to build. It exists in a state of probability until you actually play it. Cadet, HFY interjected, their spots pulsing with concern. You cannot possibly be suggesting that a human gambling game holds the key to the most complex quantum mechanics problem in the galaxy. Zhang's eyes never left the card as he continued to manipulate it. Not exactly, but look at your equation again. Everyone's trying to solve it by forcing the three states to exist simultaneously in the same space. But what if? He pulled out two more cards, performing what looked like a simple shuffling trick that somehow left all three cards occupying the same space for a split second. The entire room went silent. Even the perpetually humming crystalline students stopped their calculations to stare. What if, Zhang continued, standing up and approaching the main display, we're not looking at three different states trying to exist together? What if we're looking at one state that's learned how to be in three places at once? Sergeant Kletix's photonic form dimmed to nearly invisible levels. That's impossible. The mathematics alone would require a completely different way of thinking about probability, Zhang grinned, pulling up what looked like a crude drawing of a cat on his tablet. You know, humans have been thinking about impossible quantum states since before we even knew what quantum actually meant. We just called it something different back then. And what, Sergeant Kletex asked, their voice dripping with artificial disdain, did you call it? Zhang's fingers began dancing across the holographic display, modifying the core equation in ways that made several of his classmates' universal translators start smoking. We called it magic, he said, as the impossible variable began to pulse with new life. And the thing about magic, Sergeant, is that sometimes the best trick isn't about making something impossible happen. It's about making everyone think they're seeing something impossible when really... The equation shifted, twisted, and suddenly the three quantum states weren't fighting each other anymore. They were dancing. The problem with your approach, Zhang said, his fingers flying across the holographic display with increasing confidence, is that you're all trying to force quantum mechanics to play by classical rules. But back on Earth, we learned something interesting about quantum physics. It doesn't care about our rules. The equation now pulsed with a life of its own, its impossible variable, spinning in ways that made several of the crystalline students emit distress harmonics. The Marixian neural network had gone into emergency shutdown, and the Hiloxi student had compressed themselves into a dense ball of worried gas. Observe, Zhang continued, pulling up what looked like a crude drawing of a deck of cards being shuffled in zero gravity. In quantum mechanics, we talk about superposition like it's some mystical state. But humans, we've been dealing with superposition since we invented card counting. Sergeant Kletix's photonic form flickered rapidly. This is absurd. You cannot possibly compare quantum states to primitive gambling tools. Can't I? Zhang's grin took on an almost predatory quality. Watch this. He began inputting a series of calculations that looked suspiciously like poker odds mixed with advanced calculus. In poker, when you're calculating odds, you're not just thinking about the cards you can see. You're thinking about all possible cards that could exist in the deck, all possible hands that could be formed, and all possible moves your opponents might make. The main equation started to transform. Where before it had been fighting itself, now it began to flow like water, each impossible state flowing into the next, in a perpetual dance of probability. "Holy quantum fluctuations," whispered one of the Voltaran students, their sensory stalks twisted into knots. "He's treating the quantum states like they're cards in a cosmic deck." "Exactly," Zhang exclaimed, his excitement making his tablet's holographic display flicker. "But here's the real trick. In quantum mechanics, just like in poker, the observer effect changes everything. Watch what happens when we apply the Heisenberg uncertainty principle through the lens of a poker bluff." He input another series of calculations, this time incorporating what appeared to be betting patterns from a high-stakes poker game. The impossible variable began to pulse in rhythm with his inputs, its three states no longer fighting for dominance but instead taking turns. "You see," Zhang explained as alerts began blaring from the classroom's quantum sensors. "We've been thinking about this all wrong. We don't need the three states to exist simultaneously in the same space. We just need them to exist simultaneously in the same probability field." Instructor Nixavak's appendages were now tied in knots that would take hours to untangle. But that violates every known law of quantum coherence." "Does it?" Zhang asked, pulling out his deck of cards again. "Or does it just violate our understanding of those laws? Watch this." He performed what looked like a simple card trick, making three aces appear to occupy the same space for a fraction of a second. At the exact same moment, the impossible variable in his equation did the same thing. The classroom's gravity generators hiccuped. Several universal translators exploded in puffs of confused smoke. The Hiloxi student accidentally phased through their desk. "This is impossible," Sergeant Klotex insisted, their photonic forms strobing in distress. "The mathematical proofs, the theoretical frameworks, thousands of years of quantum physics, are all based on the assumption that reality plays fair." Zhang completed the thought, his fingers never stopping their dance across the holographic display. "But here's what we learned on Earth. Reality is the ultimate card sharp. It doesn't play fair, it plays the odds." As if to prove his point, the equation suddenly resolved itself into a form that made perfect mathematical sense if you tilted your head sideways and squinted while thinking about poker odds. The three quantum states weren't fighting anymore. They weren't even taking turns. They were shuffling. "The trick," Zhang explained as reality itself seemed to hold its breath, "isn't to force the states to exist together. It's to create a probability field where they can't exist apart, like a perfect poker hand that can't exist unless all the cards are exactly where they need to be." One of the crystalline students shattered in pure mathematical ecstasy. The Marixian neural network began speaking in tongues. The Voltaran contingent sensory stalks tied themselves into a new geometric shape that would later be named after Zhang. "But this changes everything," Instructor Nixavak managed to say, their spots pulsing in patterns never before seen in their species. "The implications for FTL travel alone." "Oh, it gets better," Zhang said, adding one final set of calculations, "because if we can make quantum states shuffle like cards in a deck." The impossible variable suddenly split into three, each one existing independently, while somehow remaining part of the whole. The classroom's quantum sensors began registering readings that shouldn't have been possible. Several textbooks spontaneously rewrote themselves. We can make them deal themselves exactly where we need them to be. The equation pulsed once, twice, and then settled into a stable form that somehow managed to look both impossibly complex and elegantly simple at the same time, like a royal flush revealed at exactly the right moment. "Congratulations," Zhang said to the stunned room. "We just turned quantum mechanics into the universe's biggest poker game, and guess what?" He held up the ace of spades, which somehow seemed to exist in three places at once. "The house doesn't always win." From somewhere deep within Station Delta 9's computational core, an artificial intelligence began to laugh. A theoretical solution is one thing, Admiral Zixix announced as they materialized in the classroom, their quantum-entangled form bristling with skepticism. But practical application is quite another. News of Zhang's breakthrough had traveled faster than photons through the station's quantum gossip network. Of course, Admiral, Zhang replied, his predatory grin never wavering. Would you like to see what happens when we actually play this hand? The classroom's quantum containment fields activated automatically, their protective barriers humming with anticipation. Standard protocol for any practical demonstration of theoretical physics, though what was about to happen would be anything but standard. Proceed, Cadet, the Admiral commanded, their quantum-entangled particles aligning in what passed for a tension among their species. Several other high-ranking officers had appeared in the observation deck above, their various appendages, stalks and sensory organs all focused on the human cadet. Zhang cracked his knuckles, a sound that made several alien officers wince. First, let's set up our probability field. His fingers danced across the holographic controls, implementing his poker-inspired quantum mathematics in real time. The air in the center of the classroom began to shimmer, like heat waves rising from hot pavement. The quantum sensors started registering readings that caused their displays to cycle through 17 different error messages before giving up and showing cartoon question marks. Now, Zhang continued, pulling out his deck of cards, watch what happens when we treat quantum states like a perfect shuffle. He performed what looked like a simple card trick, his hands moving with practiced precision. At the exact same moment, the shimmering air in the center of the room began to fold in on itself. The impossible variable from his equation manifested as a visible phenomenon, 3 distinct quantum states occupying the same space while somehow remaining separate. Sweet antimatter, breathed one of the observing scientists, their photonic form flickering in disbelief. He's actually doing it. Zhang's hands never stopped moving, his cards flowing in patterns that seemed to mirror the quantum fluctuations in the probability field. The key is to understand that reality, like any good poker player, will always follow the path of maximum probability, unless you change the rules of the game. The shimmering intensified. Several of the classroom's gravity generators overloaded and shut down, leaving everyone except Zhang floating slightly above their seats. The crystalline students began emitting harmonics that matched the quantum frequency of the experiment. Cadet, Admiral Zixix's voice crackled with barely contained excitement. Are you suggesting that you can control quantum states by manipulating probability itself? Not exactly, Admiral, Zhang replied as he executed what looked like a particularly complex card shuffle. The quantum field responded by twisting into shapes that shouldn't have been possible in normal space-time. I'm suggesting that probability was never real to begin with. It's just the universe's way of playing cards with itself. Station Delta 9's main computer began broadcasting warnings in 37 different languages. The quantum containment field started displaying colors that hadn't existed before that moment. A passing maintenance bot achieved sentience, calculated the meaning of life, and promptly shut itself down in shock. Observe, Zhang said, holding up 3 cards, all somehow the ace of spades, all somehow occupying the same point in space-time. The quantum field mirrored his motion, the 3 impossible states aligning in perfect synchronization. That's when reality decided to ante up. The quantum field collapsed in on itself, then expanded in ways that made non-Euclidean geometry look simple. The 3 quantum states merged, split, and began performing what could only be described as a subatomic dance number. By all known laws of physics, one of the observing scientists shouted, their tentacles tied in excited knots, this should be causing a cascade failure in the local space-time continuum. Known laws of physics, Zhang replied calmly as he continued his card manipulation, don't account for the house edge. The quantum field pulsed once, twice, and then stabilized into a configuration that had several theoretical physicists in the observation deck fainting in multiple dimensions simultaneously. The impossible variable had become possible, and reality itself seemed to be calling Zhang's bluff. Admiral Zixix's quantum-entangled form vibrated with barely contained excitement. Cadet Wei, do you realize what you've done? You've not only solved the unsolvable, you've created an entirely new branch of quantum mathematics. Actually, Zhang said as he casually shuffled his deck of cards while the fabric of reality rearranged itself around him. I think I've just proven that quantum mechanics has been playing poker with us all along. We just didn't know the rules of the game. The station's security systems, overwhelmed by readings that their programming insisted couldn't exist, began playing what sounded suspiciously like jazz music. 3 different AIs requested transfers to Zhang's department. The quantum field had stabilized into a pattern that looked exactly like a royal flush made of subatomic particles. But the implications, a Marixian scientist breathed, their neural network smoking slightly, for FTL travel, for energy generation, for reality itself, are pretty much unlimited. Zhang completed the thought as he performed one final card trick that somehow made the quantum field do a victory lap around the classroom. Because once you understand that the universe is just playing the ultimate game of poker, you realize something important. He held up his deck of cards, which now seemed to exist in several quantum states simultaneously. Sometimes, the best way to win isn't to change the game, it's to change your understanding of what the game actually is. The quantum containment fields finally gave up trying to contain anything and instead started taking notes. Station Delta 9's main computer requested Zhang's autograph, and somewhere, in the vast expanse of space, reality itself tipped its dealer's visor in respect. The academic board of Station Delta 9 convened in what could only be described as organized chaos. 12 different species, representing the most brilliant minds in the United Species Academy, attempted to maintain their composure while digesting the events of the past hour. Let the record show, Chancellor Visixthor's crystalline form hummed at a frequency that suggested barely contained excitement, that today's events have redefined our understanding of reality itself. In the center of the chamber, Zhang sat casually shuffling his deck of cards, seemingly oblivious to the historical significance of the moment. The security feed from his demonstration was playing on repeat on every available surface, causing several theoretical physics professors to require medical attention each time they watched it. Cadet Wei, Admiral Zixix addressed him, their quantum-entangled form still flickering with residual excitement. Do you understand that you've just invalidated roughly 3,000 years of established quantum theory? Not invalidated, Zhang corrected, executing a perfect bridge shuffle that somehow made a nearby quantum sensor hiccup. Just showed it was playing by the wrong rules. The Marixian board member's neural network sparked visibly. But this changes everything. Our understanding of FTL travel, quantum computing, reality manipulation. They paused as their translators struggled to find words grand enough. The human concept of poker probability as applied to quantum mechanics. We'll need a better name, Zhang suggested helpfully. Maybe something less Earth-centric, though I still think quantum poker theory has a nice ring to it. A Hiloxi scientist who had been quietly gasifying in the corner suddenly condensed into their most formal state. We must consider the implications. If humans can intuitively grasp concepts that our most advanced civilizations have struggled with for millennia, then maybe, Zhang interrupted, his predatory grin making a reappearance, you should all stop being so surprised when Deathworlders think outside the box. We've been doing impossible things since before we knew they were supposed to be impossible. The room fell silent, save for the soft sound of cards being shuffled and reality occasionally hiccuping in agreement. Chancellor Visixthor's crystalline form resonated thoughtfully. The Academy's curriculum will need to be completely revised. We'll need to incorporate human intuitive thinking into our quantum mechanics courses. And perhaps, Admiral Zixix added, their form brightening, we should reconsider our classification of Earth as merely a death world. Any species that can turn quantum mechanics into a card game clearly deserves a category of its own. Zhang stood up, tucking his deck of cards back into his uniform pocket. If there's nothing else, I have a maintenance crew poker game to get to. We're working on a new theory about using bluffing patterns to stabilize wormholes. The entire academic board stared at him in stunned silence. You're going to play cards? The Volteran board members' sensory stalks twisted in confusion. After everything that just happened. Best way to test a theory, Zhang replied with a shrug. Besides, I think I've finally figured out why quantum tunneling works the way it does. It's just the universe's version of a card trick. As he walked out of the chamber, leaving behind a room full of stunned academics and several smoking quantum sensors, the maintenance crew's invitation to their weekly poker game was suddenly the most sought-after document on Station Delta 9. 3 days later, the United Species Academy announced a new course requirement for all advanced physics students. Introduction to Human Card Games, and Probability Theory. The waiting list was longer than a quantum string, and Zhang, he just kept shuffling his cards, occasionally making reality itself deal him a better hand. After all, in the grand poker game of the universe, sometimes the best player isn't the one with the most advanced technology or the longest history of quantum research. Sometimes, it's just the one crazy enough to think that maybe, just maybe, reality itself is willing to play a few hands with a Deathworlder who knows how to shuffle the deck.